Hey, everybody, it's Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable, and we've got a little bit different spin on Data Decoded this week. So tomorrow, or today, as you're watching this, I will be in New York on stage at the IAB's Podcast Upfront, where I'm going to be speaking with brands about the power of podcasting, and in particular, how the podcast audience has grown and is different to the audience for broadcast radio, broadcast TV, and they're hard to reach, but certainly well worth reaching. All things that I think are going to help grow the podcasting space. The IAB's Podcast Upfront is a tough room to get into. I think it's one of the toughest rooms to get into since Benifer's wedding, which I also was not invited to, so don't feel bad about that. So I wanted to give you a taste of what I'm going to be speaking about there tomorrow. So in place of the normal Data Decoded, this is my IAB talk. I'll be doing it live, obviously, and hopefully a little less rushed. But this is a little taste of what I'm going to be talking to brands about tomorrow. It's a kind of data-driven look at how the audience has grown in podcasting, how it's changed. And I hope you enjoy it. So this is a little taste of yesterday or tomorrow, today, whatever, time travel, it works. I'm Tom Webster, and I will see you next week for a brand new Data Decoded.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable, and I'm going to share a little bit with you today about the audience for podcasting. I think that's the reason why we're all here. You've heard a lot this morning from some of the great creators in our space about some of the great content that podcasting produces. You've heard some insights for brands, but I want to talk today a little bit about why podcasting is so effective. And I know you've seen some research on that. I'm going to show you a little bit more as well. And I think a lot of people in podcasting ascribe the benefits of podcasting to podcasting being some kind of special snowflake, right? Something endemic to the medium itself, that intimacy that happens between the earbuds. And, you know, maybe there's a kernel of truth to that. I happen to think that there's a kernel of truth to that. But that's difficult to quantify, right? That's difficult to measure and kind of put your arms around, especially in a world where you're buying television by GRPs, you're buying broadcast radio by quarter hours. What exactly are you buying when you buy podcasting? Well, I'm going to tell you what you're buying when you buy podcasting. It's the reason why we're all here today, and that's the audience. And what has happened with podcasting over the last 5 or 6 years now is that the audience for podcasting, whether or not you believe podcasting itself is some kind of special snowflake, the audience itself is indeed very special. They're changing, they're growing, and they are different to the audience for broadcast radio and broadcast TV. And we quantified that in a recent study that we did called The Medium Moves the Message. And I've been involved in podcast research now for 19 years, really. I've been the driver behind things like the podcast research that's in the Infinite Dial and Share of Year, and countless studies that have really tracked the progress of the audience in podcasting. And it's the audience really that I want to focus on today, and why they're a valuable, lucrative audience for you, and an audience that you really can't reach in other ways. And to do that, I want to go back to February 12th of this year. If we could go back in time, as Huey Lewis once sang, to that big game that I think if I name it, a lawyer will shoot me in the face, but you know the game of which I speak. 100 million Americans tuned into that game. And we tuned into it for all kinds of different reasons, right? Some of us tuned in to see Rihanna. Some of us tuned in to see the ads. Some of us tuned in to watch the actual football game, though as a hardcore New Englander, I was not impressed. And some of us tuned in to watch Nuno Betancourt from Extreme shred his guitar. In any case, February 12th, 2023 was the last time that we Americans across all demographics all came together to watch or listen to the same thing. Because the truth is, all of these audiences are more disparate than ever. They're more segmented off than ever. And podcasting is certainly a huge part of that. What we're seeing today is that the podcast and broadcast audiences are pulling apart. And the study that we did, The Medium Moves the Message, really looked at 3 different platforms: broadcast television, linear over-the-top, broadcast radio, linear over-the-top television, and podcasting. And the reason why we compared those 3 platforms was simple. They're all in the same game. They're all in the 30 to 60 second spot load advertisement for your attention game, right? So what we did was we took an audience of 2,000 Americans, 18 plus, weighted to the census, and we looked at how they consumed radio, how they consumed television, and how they consumed podcasting. We found some very important things. First of all, the reach of podcasting is growing incredibly. Just 7 or 8 years ago, the reach of broadcast radio in terms of weekly reach was about 10 times the reach of podcasting. Today, the reach of radio is only about double the reach of podcasting. And of course, podcasting's reach is growing as radio's reach is shrinking. But the really impressive stat here is if you look on the left here at 18 to 34-year-olds, the reach of podcasting is now 50% of all 18 to 34-year-olds in the United States. You can compare that with the reach of AM/FM radio at 59% and the reach of network and cable television at 54%. The reach of podcasting is nearly equal to the reach of radio and TV with 18 to 34-year-olds. And if you look over on the right, you'll see that really the only demographic that's holding podcasting back right now is 55 plus. And of course, that's obviously going to grow even as 35 to 54-year-olds age into it. So podcasting is no longer just kind of an engagement and qualitative game. It's a reach game, especially 18 to 34. And you really see that when you look at the mean age of all of these various media. When you look at the average age, first of all, of the US population, it's about 48 years old. When you look at weekly podcast users, the average age is 39.7. And then as you go up into AM/FM radio, it's about 49, and television about 50. Now, if you look at the most active users of these three media, the heavy users of podcasting, the heavy listeners to broadcast radio, and the heavy viewers of television, you get a full generation's difference here. And that's really kind of an incredible stat. Again, the average age of the US population is about 48. The mean age of heavy users of podcasting is 37. That's really kind of at the tail end of the millennial generation, right? But radio and television are at 56, 58, 59 years old, and that's really kind of the end of the boomers. So there's an entire generation separating radio and television users from podcasting users when you look at the most active consumers of each medium. And finally, the other thing that's happening with the reach of podcasting is that the audiences, as you see here, are pulling apart. They actually are becoming a much more exclusive audience, at least as far as broadcast radio and broadcast television are concerned. And I want to, again, as we go back in time a second time, to go back to 2003, for a kind of a global or at least nationwide reach medium, television was kind of it, right? 2003. If you wanted to reach Americans, you reached them with television. You would reach pretty much everybody. 10 years later, podcasting is really starting to come into its own, but it's still a subset of television viewers. If you wanted to reach podcast viewers, you could reach them with a TV buy. They weren't really kind of pulled apart from that. But today, things are very, very different. In 2023, the podcast audience is separating itself fully from the radio audience and from the television audience. They're becoming kind of its own dog. And you really start to see that here when you look at the exclusive reach of podcasting 18 plus. When you look 18 plus here, 12% of podcast listeners can't be reached by radio at all. This is weekly users. And another 11% cannot be reached by TV. If you look at that 25 to 54, those numbers go up a bit. 12% can't be reached by radio. Another 15% cannot be reached by television. But again, it's on the youngest end, 18 to 34, that you really see the exclusivity of the podcast audience. Nearly 1 in 5 podcast listeners cannot be reached through radio and cannot be reached through television. And again, those circles are pulling themselves apart year by year, both as the podcast audience and reach grow and as the reach for broadcast radio and broadcast television decrease. And as a result of all of that, not only are you getting more of an exclusive audience that's difficult to physically reach with other broadcast media, you're also getting an audience that is exposed to fewer messages, period. We asked users, weekly users of all of these media, from network cable TV to even social media and YouTube, if they had seen or heard an ad in that platform in the last week. Podcast users brought up the rear here. 55% of podcast users say they heard an ad in a podcast in the last week. So the medium itself is less saturated with advertising, and you've listened to podcasts, you know that to be true, especially compared to broadcast television and broadcast radio. So the medium itself is less saturated, but also even for those consumers that do occasionally listen to radio or watch television, they're also much more likely to subscribe to premium ad-free services. And here we're looking at the blue line on the left, the total population, the middle line, people who listen to podcasts in the last week, and then the orange on the right are heavy listeners to podcasts. And here you can see that they are incredibly likely to consume ad-free on-demand media. In fact, 90% of podcast listeners subscribe to at least one form of ad-free on-demand media, whether that's audio or video, right? And that's everything from Netflix to Spotify and even audiobooks, as you can see here. Heavy listeners to podcasts are 3 times as likely to listen to audiobooks, which are, of course, generally advertising free. So they're not hearing ads on their media of choice, which is podcasts. They're not hearing that many ads anywhere else. And so they're just less saturated with messaging in general, right? So how is this impacting brands and how is this impacting advertising? Well, in the course of The Medium Moves the Message, we looked at the top 5 brands by share of voice in radio, in television, and in podcasting. And we made a whole bunch of brand lift measures, awareness, favorability, consideration, and of course, purchase behavior. And a few things in general that we notice. And I'm showing you this now because now I think you see why this is the case. This audience is less saturated with messages. They are not as inundated with broadcast style advertising as people who are not podcast listeners. And they are, in fact, then more receptive to advertising as a result of that. We asked, do you go out of your way to support the brands that support your favorite podcasts, your favorite TV shows, or your favorite AM/FM radio shows? 60% of podcast listeners say they're more likely to support the brands that support their favorite TV shows. So they're much more positive about brands and advertising in general than the supporters of radio and television are to the brands that advertise on those platforms. And they're also much more likely to say that those ads prompt a purchase. 43% of podcast listeners say that the ads on podcasts make them more likely to purchase products and services. You can compare that to about 1/3 of weekly TV viewers and about 1/4 of radio listeners. So all of that adds up to the fact that the audience for podcasts, and that's really the special snowflake, I think, of podcasting, they're less inundated with ads. They're more positive about the brands that support their favorite content. And as a result of that, they're more likely to make purchases. And we really saw that when we looked at some of the brand health metrics for the top 5 brands by share of voice in television, in radio, and in podcasts. All of this data is available at soundsprofitable.com/research. You can see in detail, we have brands in there from Progressive to Domino's to BetterHelp and Athletic Greens. So brands that dominate television, brands that dominate radio, and brands that dominate podcasting as well. And when we looked at the average of the top 5 brands in each medium and looked at a variety of upper, middle, and lower funnel measures, podcasting really dominates in the middle and lower funnel here. The average increase here between non-weekly TV viewers and weekly TV viewers in purchase behavior for these brands was 1 percentage point. In radio, it was 6 percentage points. But in podcasting, it was 16 percentage points. And again, I think a lot of times when we talk about podcasting, we talk about the unique aspects of podcasting that are endemic to the medium. Again, that intimacy, that kind of special snowflakeness of podcasting, which again, I believe in. But more than that, it is about the audience. The reach of podcasting is growing. As I mentioned before, it is about half of the reach of broadcast radio. It is about half of the reach of network and cable TV. And again, it used to be 1/10 of that just 7 or 8 years ago. That reach is becoming exclusive. That reach is becoming increasingly difficult to be exposed to traditional kind of interrupt style advertising messages. And as a result of all of that, yes, there are certain endemic qualities to podcasting that make it a very attractive environment for advertising. But more than that, it's the audience. It is the audience that we're all trying to reach. It's a very attractive audience. It's a very young audience. It's an affluent audience. And it's an audience that's receptive to the messages that you all have to offer. I'm Tom Webster. Thanks so much for listening. Again, The Medium Moves the Message is available at soundsprofitable.com/research. You've got a great day ahead of you. I'll be here with you to watch the whole thing, and I wish you the best.